Hello and welcome to another episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I am your host and beat reporter, and I've been your beat reporter covering the Jacksonville Jaguars for On SI every single day since August 2019, and we are continuing to move forward through yet another training camp together. As always, you can always find our 100% free, 24/7, boots on the ground content covering the Jacksonville Jaguars when you follow us on social media such as Facebook or Twitter at JaguarsOnSI. You can also find us at www.si.com/NFL/Jaguars. All right, folks, welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. As always, I'm your host. Today, we are going to talk about what seems to be one of those things that it's news because it's early training camp and really nothing is going on over the weekend. And that is former Jaguars tight end Evan Engram makes some jabs at the Jaguars, in my opinion, not at the Jaguars as a franchise or a base or anything like that, but of the culture that he's kind of leaving in Jacksonville, a culture that I think it's important to note is no longer what's in place in Jacksonville. We still have to see what kind of culture new head coach Liam Cohen, general manager James Gladstone, and executive vice president of football operations Tony Boselli are able to build in Jacksonville. But no matter what way you look at it, Evan Engram's point of reference is the team that he played for in 2022, 2023, and then last year in 2024. Now, before we get into it and before I give my take, which I wrote about, you can find in a column at Jaguars on SI, www.si.com/NFL/Jaguars. I think it's at least worth, adding to the context what exactly Engram had to say. Engram was asked about the Broncos culture, locker room, just along those lines. Like, hey, more or less, what do you think of the Broncos culture? And he said, quote, "That is probably my favorite thing about being a Bronco right now. Just the way that the team connects, the way they push each other, the way they challenge each other, the way we bonded, just the standard we have for ourselves, the camaraderie that we have, the laughs that we have. Like, it is an incredible locker room. A lot of great leaders. I tell people, all my family, it is hard to be the first one in the building. I am used to being the first one. In Jacksonville, I was always the first one. It was really easy. Here, it is kind of tough. A lot of guys doing it at a high level. It is just a contagious environment, and we all want to get better, and we all have high standards that we want to achieve together." My perception of this, and I'm not even sure if it's my perception, I think it's pretty clear, what he was trying to say, is that during his 3 years in Jacksonville, his perspective and the environment that he knew was not one that seems overly similar to the one that's in Denver now. Now, again, that isn't saying anything about the Jaguars' new regime, about the current Jaguars, about, that isn't him, to me, trashing the franchise on the way out. It's just him being blunt and him being honest. Now, one thing I will say is I think you need to look at Engram's reputation as one of the leaders of that Jaguars locker room into account when you look at this quote. Evan Engram, to me, all 3 years he was there, I'm not sure how many guys were more hardworking. To me, it was him, Josh Hines-Allen, Trayvon Walker, in terms of what we could visibly see and things that we, could hear. Evan Engram was always the first guy on the field, not just in the building. He was always the first guy on the practice field, one of the last guys off, always working and honing on his craft. And when it came to being the vocal part of the locker room, the part that got the message out each and every week when the media and the cameras are in the locker room looking for a statement on why a season is slipping away that so many people had high hopes for, Evan Engram was that guy that spoke. He spoke for the locker room. He, to me, has as much credibility when it comes to this topic as anybody could have. And that's regardless of what you think about the decision to move on from him, his contributions, etc. I know the player that I covered for 3 years, and he was one of the leaders of that locker room. So if he, to me, is calling out their pass culture, I'm not sure anybody should say boo to him. He has the credibility in this case, in this instance. He was the team captain. He was the guy a lot of people went to, know where things stand. But the Jaguars team that he's talking about there isn't really a team that exists anymore. The Jaguars churned close to half of their roster this offseason, I'd say. A lot of guys out the building. They didn't retain a single free agent. I don't imagine that's something teams are actively doing every year. They were the only team to do so this year. They said goodbye to guys like Engram, guys like Christian Kirk, guys like Gabe Davis, Ronald Darby, Devin Duvernay, all of these things. It is mostly a new roster. There are still some key holdovers, obviously. You still have Trevor Lawrence, Josh Hines-Allen, Trayvon Walker, Brian Thomas Jr., Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, Brendan Strange, Walker Little, Anton Harrison, Foye Oluokun, Tyson Campbell, Devin Lloyd, Andrew Wingard, and a lot of the other guys who have been there for several years now. But the coaching staff, completely new. Outside of a few faces. The front office, even newer than the coaching staff right now. And I think, if anything, the Jaguars' new leadership group has shown that if there was a culture problem when they got here in Jacksonville, and judging by Ingram's comments, it seems like, even if it wasn't a problem, maybe it wasn't a strong and vibrant culture by any means, or at least not one resembling what looks to be one of the more solid teams in the AFC and the NFL at large this year, then I think it's a fair point for him to make. And I don't think it's him taking a shot at the franchise that he played for. It has nothing to do with the people that are there now, in my opinion. That is his telling of the history of the Jaguars that he played for. And is anybody really, in my opinion, either doubting it? I'm not going to say players didn't work hard. I absolutely would not, know that. These guys put their bodies and really lives on the line every single day. But what I will say is this is a team that from the second half of 2023 onward crumbled under any kind of adversity. And yes, that's harsh, but I think it's fair, and I'm not sure anybody would disagree with me. All those losses down the stretch in 2023 that shouldn't have happened. It seemed like the fumble in week 1 against Miami completely took the air out of the sideline, and they never got it back. 10 one-score losses in one season. This was a team that, to me, maybe didn't have that edge. And that's what I think Jaguars head coach Liam Cohen really has to provide. And that's what, honestly, I've seen some of that edge from him, in my opinion. In press conferences, there isn't any guessing how this guy feels, and there isn't any, I guess the best way I would describe it, Doug Peterson's kind of reaction to a lot of press conference type questions is kind of a shrug. They would handle their business. They would let things be known inside the building, when things weren't up to par and up to standard, but Liam Cohen lets it known directly. There's no having to decipher anything or wondering how he feels. So I think he has that edge to him, and he can give the Jaguars that edge. But that is what Liam Cohen and the Jaguars' new regime has to change about Jacksonville. That culture that Evan Engram was talking about. So I know he's probably caught plenty of criticism from Jaguars fans. I don't think it's necessarily fair. As a guy who gave a lot to the fan base, gave a lot to the franchise, gave a lot to the community during his time with the franchise. And again, to me, if I had to come up with a very small list of players who could speak to the culture that the Jaguars had in the last few years, Evan Engram's right there at the top of the list. And I'm not sure it's that close to the next guy on the list. Thank you guys for listening to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. Please find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all other podcast platforms. As always, I'll be back next time.